practices to maintain, to ensure mental wellness, especially in these very critical times. So, having said that, let me come back to the topic, and I'll be presenting some insightful views on scholarly communication. So, let me get started. So, what exactly is it? Who needs it? And why do researchers need to care about scholarly communication to begin with? Now, the first thing is, what is scholarly communication? Now, I'm sure all of you, because this is like a faculty training event, online event, I'm sure many or most of you must have published in good journals. Some of you might be like young faculty members who just joined, like probably last year or so, and you're probably still working on your first manuscript. But nevertheless, this is a very critical area, and everybody who is involved in the research needs to own some skills in the area of scholarly communication. Now, why is it so critical for researchers? The reason is as follows. Now, during your tenure as a researcher, you'll be publishing lots of research articles in good journals, and I'm sure nowadays almost every other university I see insists that their faculty members publish in really good journals. They should aim high, they should have very high targets, and the least that they can do is at least to have publications in Shimago, journals with a Shimago ranking, or Thomson Reuters Impact Factor. Now the name keeps changing. A few days ago it was Thomson Reuters. Now I think some other company has taken over. So, but basically you need to publish in good journals with good H index, and the European metric for that is SJR. So now there are major implications to this area. If you are good in scholarly communication, you can write good research articles, you can publish good review articles, you can write successful grant applications, you can even file good patents, you can do research promotion, you can do successful science outreach, you can be a very good speaker at a conference or a webinar or a workshop, you can do good quality technical presentations for a variety of audiences. You can also handle official correspondences well, and one of the most important area is replies to referees. So all of these are really critical areas in the area of academic research, academic or industrial research. And whenever it comes to publication or submissions of grants or patent applications, replies to referees, so many places. So every single place you need to use your skill, your skill sets in the area of scholarly communication. Now, let me get started by citing two examples. Just like Nikhat madam mentioned, when I was working at a private university in Gujarat, I wrote a very compelling, kind of an internal document. It was kind of a semi-technical report on the requirements of the university, research requirements of the university. And after several presentations, meetings, and back and forth, finally my proposal got approved, and the university management gave us a funding of 500,000. We established a small research center which was inaugurated by a Nobel laureate from Israel. And so that is just one example. Another very recent non-technical example where I used some of my communication skills is, I have an NRI friend in Boston, and he was trying to collect funds for the Indian armed forces, considering the things they are kind of going through on the Ladakh border. So he approached me and he shared a letter with me, and that letter was not in a very good shape. It had the basic elements, but the style and the content and the grammar and lots of things are missing. So I completely edited the letter, I completely polished it using my skills in the area of communication, not just scholarly communication, even like non-scholarly or routine communication. And after doing that, I'm very happy to let everyone know that funds worth rupees 50 lakh, that is around USD 75,000 US dollars, that's around 50 lakh, half a crore, were approved by a multimillionaire from Boston. And that happened after I shared a letter with the person who had initially shared it with me. I did the editing and polishing, and it went through. And now they are getting even more funds for the Indian Army, Indian Navy, and Indian Air Force. So big salute to the big salute to India's armed forces. And with that, let's continue with our presentation. So now coming back to our topic of scholarly communication. Now, what are the key elements of a successful manuscript or grant application? The very first thing is it should have a novel idea. Everybody knows this. If you don't have a novel idea, your manuscript, your research paper, your grant is never going to get approved. So you definitely need to have communication skills. You definitely need to have very good command on how you write and how you speak, and but then you should also have a novel idea. Merely having good communication skills is not going to get you good grants and good publications. So let me start by hitting the core area. And the core area is novel ideas. Communication skills can be honed. You can practice through reading, writing, communicating, you can do all those things. But the basic idea is to think and come up with a novel idea first, and then you can communicate it well to your target audience. And that is what is scholarly communication. You can use it at so many places. You can use it at conferences, workshops, webinars, grant proposals, so forth and so on. Now, everybody knows that if a grant is well written, it gets funded. If a manuscript is nicely written, if it does not have any obvious grammatical errors or communication issues, and if the idea is clear and novel, it definitely gets published and cited. Now, what are the elements of a successful grant application or a highly cited research article? So first of all, the very important thing to understand here is everybody has to do a very thorough literature survey. And the reason why I'm having this in my presentation on scholarly communication is because if you do a lot of literature survey, you will end up reading and going through a lot of really good quality research articles. And because of this, you can in fact improve your communication skills. Because what happens is many people know how to write, they know how to read, they know how to write something about the research, whatever research they are doing in the lab. But what many people forget to do is to listen and to read. So what we have to do is we have to constantly be in the habit of reading new high quality articles. Now, I won't say that read any random articles. When I myself start reading every day, I make sure I read only the best of the best. I only read articles published in good journals. So that is what everybody should do. There is a fantastic website, by the way, sciencedaily.com. Sciencedaily.com. What they do is basically they publish a lot of high quality research from various areas, be it science or engineering or whatever, life sciences, neuroscience, so many areas, technology. So the basic idea that I'm trying to communicate here is, if you want to be good at scholarly communication, you have to read good research articles, you have to read good review articles all the time. Novel idea, just like I said, your idea has to be novel. Then of course you have to communicate it well, and of course you have to have all the adequate training and resources. Now, what is the most important thing when it comes to scholarly communication? Because what is the end product of scholarly communication? There are several end products of scholarly communication. One is successful grant application. If you do good research but do not communicate it well, you will not get a grant. Whereas if you do not do good research and communicate it well, you will still not get the grant. So you have to do good research and communicate it well. So what are the reviewers' expectations? First of all, compliance with guidelines. Now, every time you submit any technical document, be it a grant application or a research manuscript or a review article, to whatever agency you're submitting it to, the very first thing that you have to do is to go and check their author guidelines, or go and check the submission guidelines. What is the requirement? For example, here, Gujarat Council on Science and Technology, they have something called as a minor research grant, and they give grant worth several lakh rupees but there are some technical requirements. So you have to go through those. So a very important part of scientific communication is not just English and grammar, but it is also how you logically arrange your manuscript or your grant application in the right format using the right guidelines. So this is very critical. So every time, whenever somebody approaches me and asks me, what they should do if they want to write a successful grant application or a good manuscript and send it to a good journal, the very first thing I tell them to do is go and check the author guidelines of their target journal or their funding agency. That's not the only thing that we need to do. We also need to ensure that whatever we try to communicate is well understood by our target audience. So suppose I am asked to give a lecture on a particular topic to people who have a PhD, then I'll customize my presentation accordingly. Whereas if it is to be presented to a group of people who are in the first year of their master's degree, then I'll simplify it extensively. So it just depends on your target audience, how you modify your communication. uh, Before going further, I just want to make sure, is the communication okay from my side? Audio and the PowerPoint both are visible. Okay, so now, what are the other reviewers' expectations? Reviewers also expect researchers to have an analytical mindset, and they should understand what are the core issues, and how the way they present it is also important. And for all of this, you need to own some very good technical communication skill. Now, there's a difference between the regular communication and technical communication. When you do technical communication, you have to use certain phrases that are very specific to your field. So let's say I am from the field of biochemistry, then I have to communicate my research using certain phrases that are very unique to my field. If you are from management, if you are from aerospace engineering, if you are from mechanical engineering, these things keep varying from field to field. Some definitions, although are unique across fields, so regardless of whatever field you are in, they stay the same. But so there are some minor variations based on your field. So all those things are there. Now, the very first thing, abstract. Now most of the people, what they do is, when they try to compile a technical document, let's say a manuscript, the biggest mistake to do is by start writing the abstract first. You should never do that. The first thing to do is to finish writing your discussion section, or your whatever are the main findings, at least the results section. And then once you have a clear idea about what you exactly have found out, that is a good time to write the abstract, and not the other way around. You do not start your research paper with an abstract, although it is at the beginning. Abstract is the thing that you write in the end. That's what I tell everybody. Because if you do that, you'll write a very fantastic abstract, because by the time you reach the stage where you are ready with the discussion section, you'll have a very clear idea about what to write in the abstract in only 200 to 300 words, because there is a word limit. This is a very important part of scholarly communication. Your ability to be brief, your ability to communicate your thoughts in the least number of words matters a lot. And this is one of the expectations from the referees. Now, the bulk of your text, what is the bulk of your text? Basically your introduction, materials and methods, all the standard sections. But at the end of the day, your idea has to be novel. Regardless of how great of a communicator you are, you should still have a novel idea, and then of course you should communicate it well to your target audience. Now, some general suggestions. Now, whenever I talk about scholarly communication, I always ask people to ensure that the general format of their manuscript or grant application is as per the guidelines. Captions generally should be above the table, below the figure. Images should be clear and of high resolution, and I'll come to that topic later on. Now, when it comes to references, there is no such thing as right or wrong. It is simply a matter of style. But for references, I'll say never ever type your references manually. There is a fantastic software called Mendeley Desktop, It is free of charge, and you can you can also use EndNote, but I think that's a paid version. So if you use Mendeley for your scholarly communication while preparing your grant proposal or manuscript, you will save a lot of time. You know, one day I remember a researcher approached, and the researcher told me that he or she had spent almost a week typing 100 odd references. So I told the researcher to use Mendeley. And by the way, if you want to see, I have made a video on videonium.com, which is the website I maintain. It's a commercial website, and on that I have also posted a video on how to use Mendeley desktop. It has got a lot of views from around the world. So you can use that for your scholarly communication. It will save a lot of your time. Now when it comes to scholarly communication, many people, there's a small misconception that scholarly communication is only limited to manuscripts and grant proposals. No, that's not true. Even if you go and you try to present your work to some audience at a conference, or some kind of a workshop, you still need to have novel idea, and you still need to have all of those elements, but you should be also able to present well. Now let's say I'm trying to get funds from someone, and I need 50 lakh rupees, and I do a very sloppy presentation, and the person has no idea what I'm talking about. Even although my research and my intentions are good, I'll not be getting the 50 lakh approval, grant approval. Why? Because I was not able to communicate my thoughts with clarity. And if you communicate with clarity, you will get your papers published, you will get your patents approved, you will get your grants approved. So you have to have a good idea, and you have to communicate it well. Now here's an example. This is a standard, these are the standard guidelines for a GUJCOS grant. So description of the proposal, work plan. Does everybody know what's a Gantt chart, PERT Gantt chart? I'm sure everybody knows. It basically gives some information about the project timeline. Like after 3 months, where do you expect to be? After 6 months, what do you think will happen? Something on those lines. So you should have those things in place in your grant proposal. Now, this is a very critical element of scholarly communication. You should have the things in the right format, in the right logical sequence. Merely having the English and the grammar correct is not going to help. I'm sure many of you must be using Grammarly.com. Many of you must be having Grammarly.com's premium version with you, but that alone does not help. You should also have your things in the right format, and that's why sticking to the author guidelines and sticking to the guidelines for prospective grant applicants matters a lot. Now look at this chart shared by, I think this is a standard chart shared by NAC. So NAC, look at the emphasis. 40% is on scholarly communication, awards and publications. That's basically scholarly communication. 40% of whatever you get from NAC is basically entirely dependent on your scholarly communication. And then, do you notice something at the top? Research promotion. Now, this is a fairly new area in India. Abroad, many professors are already doing it. And if you go to my website videonium.com, you'll see that I have uploaded many videos on scientific topics. So at present, I am even commercially making videos for researchers. So if you want, your research to be visible to more people, that thing can be done. And abroad, they're doing it a lot right now. For example, many universities, they have established tie-ups with professionals like me. And what they do is, they at the moment somebody publishes some good research articles, they ask the agency or the website to make a video on it, and that is basically called as research promotion. That is also, by the way, a part of scholarly communication, because you're trying to communicate your thoughts to an audience, and these are thoughts based on your research. So that is still a part of scholarly communication. You're trying to simplify your research for the taxpayers or the ordinary people who do not understand the concept, but who really are interested in what you're doing. Let's say I'm working in the area of cancer, I'm working on type 2 diabetes. Now everybody will not understand what I'm doing, but if I make a very powerful video and simplify whatever I'm doing through the video, people will understand what I'm saying. So basically, if I communicate my thoughts really well, people will understand what I'm saying. So just have a look at this pie chart once again, and you'll understand the importance of communication. Now let's start with some actual examples, because this is a webinar on scholarly communication. I thought of actually sharing some very common mistakes that I have seen over the years. I have literally edited hundreds of manuscripts and PhD theses and documents, and I've looked at patent applications, so many things. And I can tell you right away that there are many mistakes that are commonly present. Choosing the right tense. The synthesized drug inhibits the enzyme versus the synthesized drug inhibited the enzyme. Now, you cannot say that the synthesized drug inhibits the enzyme. If you say that, it means that it is a very general statement. No, you just discovered it yesterday. So you cannot generalize it until and unless many people also find that it is consistent. And then probably someday you can say that, yeah, aspirin is a blood thinner. Yes, that is a general fact. But then, like for example, the sun rises in the east. Yes, that's a general fact. That it's an established fact. It's a natural phenomenon. You cannot say the sun rose in the east. Like no, the sun rose in the east yesterday. You cannot say that. It always is going to rise in the east. It is never going to rise in the west. So yeah, this is one very common error. Now you should never use IV, etc. Like you should not say IV observed a gradual change in the cell shape. The only place where you are allowed to use I and V is probably in the discussion section somewhere, or maybe it depends on the journal. You have to go through the author guidelines, but a general thumb rule is to avoid I, V, they, etc. All those things. Just use the passive tense. Is say after adding the drug compound, a gradual change was observed. Now, does anybody know what is an end dash? This is a very common mistake that many people make, and many journals, they reject some of the manuscripts, not because the scholarly communication is bad, but because some of the symbols or special characters are missing. Like for example, now that is not like the sole reason. That there are generally many other reasons, but generally this is one of the reasons. So basically, when you go through the guidelines, they'll always say that don't use hyphens, use end dashes. So if you go to Microsoft Word and go to insert symbols, special characters, you'll see a slightly elongated thing, and that's called as an end dash. It is basically used to indicate ranges. So a hyphen is never to be used. If you say reference number 7 to 12, you should use end dash instead of a hyphen. Now, in-text citations. This is a very common mistake again. Now, if you are citing 4 different publications and you say 4, 5, 6, 7, many journals say, most of the journals I know, they'll always say 4 n-7 instead of 4, 5, 6, 7. Then 14 to 15 is not recommended. That's just 2. So you can just say 14 and 15, 14, 15. Now spaces before commas and periods. Now just go very near to the presentation and see, do you see an extra space between reports, the S and the comma, or centrifuged, the D and the full stop, there's an extra space. Now how do you remove all these things? There's an easy way of doing that. Just say Control F and replace all space comma with comma. So throughout the document, wherever there is a space and a comma by mistake, or a space and a full stop by mistake, inserted by mistake, they'll all be removed by a comma and a full stop. So these are some formatting errors, but nevertheless, they are important, because many researchers, they submit their manuscripts to really good journals with all of these mistakes. And these are very critical elements of scholarly communication. Just like I say, scholarly communication is not just English and grammar, and also not just guidelines, but also formatting. And these things come into picture. Now let's do a quick interactive session. Now I'm not sure if this is the right time to do an interactive session, because if everybody starts speaking, then it will be a lot of chaos. So just do it as a self exercise. try to find the right answers. The incorrect options have been given, and you try to work out the correct option. So the solutions was then poured into A. Of course not. The solutions were there poured into. Subject verb agreement. Solutions were. Solution was. The temperature were measured. No, that's wrong. The temperature was measured. The temperatures were measured, but the temperature was measured. Numbers and the corresponding unit. This is a very common mistake again. Many people, very even if they are good in research, they make mistakes with units, and that's a very critical component of scholarly communication. You have to have accurate units. The temperature of the flask was maintained at 400 K. Now that small k stands for kilo actually. Capital K is for Kelvin. So this is a very common mistake. Every number should be accompanied by the right unit. There is always a space between the number and the unit. The measured output, I'm sure there are friends from the engineering and technology faculty here, so they'll completely agree with me. The measured output of some device was 500 kilowatt. Now this is not kilowatt, this is Kelvin watt, and that's a wrong unit. The right answer is kilowatt. Okay, so the measured output was 500 kilowatt. Numbers and the corresponding unit. Once again, the measured width was 20 meter. Again, there should be a space between 20 and m. Now, what is not recommended is to spell out. You don't need to spell out any unit. The measured width, you need not say METR or METRE, depending on whether you are submitting to an American journal or to a British journal. You just have to mention the unit symbol. You don't have to spell it out. Another very common mistake in in the area of scholarly communication. Now, not inserting spaces is also something that I see very often. I have made these corrections in literally dozens of PhD theses. At that stage, generally, you don't expect these kind of errors to be there, but surprisingly, they're still there. So, what is incorrect? 29 plus minus 4 is and n equal to 100. Sample size, they are both incorrect. There should be a space before and after an equal to sign, and before and after a plus or minus sign. That is the standard convention. All right. Now, the importance of articles, you cannot underscore the importance. I mean, you cannot underestimate, you have to underscore, but you cannot underestimate the importance. You cannot say he is the citizen of India. India does not have only one citizen. He is a citizen of India because there are many citizens, out of which he is like one of them. So he's a citizen of India. Now, but can you say that a president of India went to Paris? No, you cannot. How many presidents does India have? At present, only one, as far as I know, at least till yesterday. So the president of India went to Paris. It should be the instead of a. And it's a very common mistake again. Now, many people will say that how do these things matter? But I'll tell you where they matter. I have myself been a reviewer, and whenever you're a reviewer of a journal, as soon as a manuscript comes to your email, you get an option: reject manuscript for issues pertaining to language and grammar. Many referees, the moment they see plenty of mistakes in the area of grammar and general communication, they, without even reviewing your research paper, they're directly going to click on the reject paper because of issues with communication, and then you'll again have to work on your manuscript. So in order to avoid that, nobody is going to tell these things to you, and therefore I am telling this to you. These things are really critical. So make sure you understand these things really well. I'm sure many of you do, but nevertheless, it's a great revision. I eat an apple every day. No, if it's A-E-I-O-U, it's an apple. It's not a apple. He went home a hour ago. Now, something sounds like A-E-I-O-U. You should have an. He went home an hour ago. Now, a very common mistake in many manuscripts that I see, many from science, engineering, they'll agree with me. And also maybe some of the research papers from, some other areas. Now, all of the above measurements were carried out between 1 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. Now, if it is between something, the word should be and. It's not 1:30 to 3:30. It's between and. from to. So if it is from 1, it should be from 1 to 3, but between 1 and 3. So there is a difference. Now, when should you use since? Now, this is a very common mistake that many Indian researchers do. Now, they always say since the bacterial strain was resistant to antibiotics, or as the bacterial strain was resistant, both of which are incorrect. You'll be surprised, but the right way to say this is because the bacterial strain was resistant to most antibiotics, we did the following was done. So, because the bacterial strain was so and so, the following was done. So it is a common misconception that you cannot start a sentence with because. No, that's not correct. You can very well start a sentence with because, and in fact, that's the right way. You shouldn't say since. Since is an indicator of time. Like for example, since 1990, that is fine. But for all other purposes, you use because. All right, the next one. Now, when it comes to scholarly communication, the very important thing that you have to understand is whenever you're trying to submit your journal, your manuscript to your journal, first thing you have to do is to check whether it's a British journal or it's a US, American journal, or it may not be a British or American journal. It could be a European journal which follows US English, or it could be a European journal that follows, UK English, British English. So in that case, you have to completely edit, and in fact, you have to change the settings of your Microsoft Word processor, and you have to ensure that you use UK English to spell check or you use US English to spell check, but don't use both. Like a researcher had once sent me a mixed document. Half of it was written in US English, half of it was written in British English. So it was very confusing for me to understand where the person is going to submit it, because half of it was in US English, half of it was in British English. So in US English, you use PROGRAM as the spelling for program. And then these are the spellings for American people. And on the right, you'll see the spellings for British people. So you have to take care of these things. Now, a very important example. If you insert a comma at the wrong place, or if you forget inserting a comma where there should have been one, you will end up making some really fantastic sentences. The first one, let me eat grandpa, versus let me eat grandpa. What is the difference? First one, it means that the grandson or the granddaughter is actually consuming his or her grandpa. Oh my goodness. Do we do that? Not at least in India. I don't know if they do that in China. I'm not sure. Those people are crazy. But not in India. We don't. We respect our grandpa. So we say, let me eat, comma, grandpa. Now, second one, great advice on how to save time. Why do we have to have such a huge sentence? Just say, great time saving tips. So, brevity matters. What is brevity? Brevity is like the faculty of being concise. You have to be to the point. You have to have word count reduction, WCR. I have done scientific editing for a lot of manuscripts with a very high client satisfaction rate, almost more than 98%. And I know for sure that brevity matters a lot. So you have to use minimum number of words wherever possible. So instead of saying, what a fantastic advice on how to save time, just say, great time saving tips. So that is called word count reduction. Brevity, basically. BREVITY. Shortening your sentences. How will you shorten this sentence? I'll not tell the answer. Can you quickly think about an answer? It is a self exercise. You don't have to tell anybody. Just think about an answer. Make it a point to give your manuscript a proofread. Instead of saying make it a point to give your manuscript a proofread, what you can say is simply proofread your manuscript. So this is called brevity, word count reduction, or WCR. So whenever you submit your grant to a good journal, just make sure wherever possible you should do WCR, or word count reduction, because many researchers come to me and say, oh my god, they have a word limit of only 5,000 words, and I have written a manuscript that is 5,600 words long or 6,000 words long. You know what I tell them? I tell them to do WCR, or word count reduction. Sentences like these can be reduced to tiny phrases like proofread your manuscript. They should be cute, nice, simple, and easy to understand. Now, compound adjectives, another very common area where I see plenty of mistakes. FDA approved drug. Many people forget to put a hyphen between FDA and approved. State of the art equipment. I'm sure your university, BS Abdul Rahman Crescent Institute of Science and Technology, has a lot of state of the art science and technology equipment. So, how do you say that? State hyphen of hyphen the comma, sorry, the hyphen art, state of the art equipment. That is called as a compound adjective. State of the art is a compound adjective and it describes the noun equipment. Surface adsorbed is a compound adjective and it describes the noun gas. So you have to use hyphens at all of these places. And this is a very common mistake I see in grant applications and manuscripts and so many places. Patent applications, you name it, and I'll see it. Crystallization didn't occur. Now, apparently, there does not. You'll see that there is no difference between these two. Crystallization didn't occur versus crystallization did not occur. So, what's the difference here? Excuse me. The difference here is I have used a contraction in the first case, whereas I have avoided the use of a contraction in the second case. What is a contraction? Whenever you do scholarly communication, you try to avoid contractions. Like, for example, you don't say didn't, couldn't, you say did not, could not. We could not establish the fact that we were not able to verify. Instead of saying we weren't able to verify, you say we were not. I mean, you can use we and I only probably in the discussion section, but if you use it somewhere, don't use contraction. Or even in places like this, like the materials and methods section, crystallization didn't occur. No, crystallization did not occur. Now, whenever you see non-standard abbreviations, first of all, you have to avoid the use of non-standard abbreviation. And whenever you use them, you have to spell them out at the first occurrence. Let's make it more clear through an example. If I say the method called the map method was extensively used for this. Now, how many people know what is the map method? I myself didn't know about it before I actually saw this. So what is map? Map is magnified analysis of the proteome. Is that the only way to spell out map? No, there are thousands of abbreviations that are that start with the letter M and that have the letter A and the letter P. And map can stand for a variety of things. So depending on what area of expertise, what field of study what field you're working in, you have to make sure you spell it out first and then put it in the bracket. And once you put it in the bracket, from that point onwards, you can keep saying map, 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 map throughout the manuscript. So this is a very critical element of scholarly communication. You have to spell out the abbreviation first at the first instance, and then you can keep using it till the end of the manuscript or grant application. Now, this is a very common mistake. The data was collected from several engineering institutes. No, data is a plural word. The singular is datum, the plural is data. So data were collected from several engineering institutes. That's the correct form. Now again, singular versus plural. Many people make this mistake. Hypotheses versus hypothesis. Datum versus data. Bacterium versus bacteria. Phenomena. Phenomena is plural. Phenomenon is the singular. NAC criterion. For example, if you're making a document on NAC, NAC criterion number 3, not NAC criteria number 3. So all of these things really, really matter a lot. Now let's do a quick exercise in scientific editing. I am going to share with you, I have already shared with you, on your screen you will see a paragraph. It is part of an abstract and clearly there are some mistakes in this abstract. It's not the entire abstract, it's a part of it, but you have to identify the mistake. I'll give you a couple of minutes, probably 1 or 2 minutes. I'll quickly drink some water. Till that time, you just have to quickly try to identify the mistakes. I'll give you just 2 minutes and I'll be back. Okay, so clearly there are mistakes in this, abstract. So let's try to find out what they are. All right. So can you see the mistakes now? So in the attempt to mimic nature's, chemists have developed, so many mistakes. Now, in an attempt to mimic nature, chemists have developed a large set of reactions. And if you're recording this, webinar, you can go back and have a look at this so that you know what's right and what's wrong. I don't have to go through the entire thing. You can just go back and refer to it. But this is just a quick example of what kind of mistakes people make. The most basic thing that the most basic mistakes that people make are not proofreading their manuscript before submitting it to a journal, or to a funding agency. So you have to make sure you proofread. By proofreading, what I mean is not just spelling, not just a word spell check. You should also do proofreading. I'll tell you why. There are some mistakes that cannot be detected even by Microsoft Word. For example, if I say I like red flowers, and if I spell red as READ instead of RED, I don't think Microsoft Word will identify that as a mistake. So your manuscript will directly end up in the hands of reviewers who will simply start smiling or laughing depending on what mood they are in. So that's why now there's a smart fix for this. You can either hire a professional, editing service. Sometimes even I do professional, scientific editing. But another alternative is to go for Grammarly Premium. Grammarly.com. They have a free Microsoft add-in, and they also have a paid version. I would recommend that you go for the paid version, the Microsoft Premium, because it identifies many more mistakes than the free version. Okay, so now correspondence with referees. Now this is a very critical part when it comes to scholarly communication. You have to communicate professionally. You have to make sure your responses sound technically accurate, and you have to make sure there are no language errors in your replies. Let me share two examples with you. Now, many times referees say, do this, do that, do this, do that. Now, the first example is where you can do those things. Second example, where it's next to impossible for you to do those things. So how will you say that? Um so you have to start first of all that uh, thanks to referee number one for identifying this whatever mistake, or thanks to referee number one for sharing these insightful suggestions. We will definitely redo this experiment by incorporating the following, and then you make a list of what things you are going to do, or I mean not what you're going to do, what you have done, because you're going to submit it after you revise it. So in view of the fact that the following things were not acceptable, we have now replaced a bland blah with something else, and then give a list of things. And then if you write it in that way and very precisely say that, okay, this is what you said and this is what we have changed, now can you accept it? Yes, they'll be happy. But if you, instead of that, if you say, you should never sound arrogant when you reply to referees. You cannot say referee number one is wrong. Referee number one has no idea what he or she is saying, and I am the sole authority in this field. Your great manuscript is never going to be accepted by any referee in the world. I can give it to you in writing. Mostly, I mean, 98% of the times they'll not. Because they'll just think that you are a person, you're somebody who's not open to suggestions, and that's not a good sign. So that's why you have to be very humble. You have to say that thanks for the suggestions, and then you have to say what you have said. Having said that, you don't have to agree all the time, but whenever you disagree, you have to do it very respectfully. For example, if some experiment is outside the scope of your area of expertise or beyond your technical capability, or that kind of equipment is not there in your lab, you cannot simply do that experiment, right? So in that case, you still say very humbly that really fantastic session, really much appreciated. However, we are unable to do this experiment at this point of time because we don't have this particular equipment, or none of our collaborators have this equipment. So then it becomes easy for even the referee to understand your point of view, and this is a very critical aspect of scholarly communication. Correspondence with referees is very important. It's very easily missed, but it's very important. Okay, so yes, do use Grammarly Premium. Now I know even I do scientific editing, but still I would say that it's a very good self-learning exercise. Because if I edit the document for somebody, there is not much of self-learning. But whereas if you use Grammarly Premium, you can always learn while you are correcting. So that's a very good exercise. So always use such things and then make a note of what error you made so that next time you'll not make that error. Now, the last topic that I want to touch upon is PowerPoint presentations. Now, it's a very quite often, very often people ignore this topic, but it's very critical. When you're trying to present anywhere, you have to make sure the font size is not too small. One very funny thing that I see many times is many researchers, when they go to a funding agency to present their grant proposal, they put in literally thousands of animations, and that's not something what we want. Now have a look at this. Too many animations, right? It absolutely looks funny. I'm sure none of the researchers do this, but this is probably for the new faculty members who must have joined like yesterday, and you have to make sure that your PowerPoint sounds looks professional. Captions, just like I said, captions above the table, below the figure, unless the journal says that it's the other way around. Then of course you have to do it the other way around. Now look at that for image of the camera. You should never squeeze any figure. You have to maintain the right aspect ratio. You have to also have the right resolution. You have to include high resolution images. Don't use low resolution images, especially in the area of biological sciences. These things have to look very, crisp and clear. References, again, there is nothing right or wrong. It's just a matter of style. So stick to the guidelines, author guidelines. Avoid inserting low resolution images. Don't use excessively long sentences. Just like I said, maintain the right aspect ratio. Use a good font type and size. Now don't use fonts like Comic Sans. Some a while ago somebody had given me their whatever profile, and it had something written in Comic Sans, and somebody had given something written in like what font was that? Some ghost or horror font. Like I was like, what kind of font is that? So never do that. Use professional fonts, and of course do not use excessive animations, just like we saw. All right, so that brings me to the end of this presentation. Now look at these references. Now everybody will tell you to read, go through standard things, but I'll tell you something more than that. Go to Nature and go, definitely go through this webcast on writing a successful grant proposal. It's a very good thing that you might, it would be a very good learning exercise, and definitely good for your whatever insights you want to gain in the area of scholarly communication. Then second one is quite interesting: what Hollywood can teach researchers about scientific storytelling. Now you'll be shocked when you see this, but no, it's not that shocking. By the way, it's there in Nature. So why is it important? Scientific communication is not limited to only writing manuscripts. You have to communicate your thoughts and whatever you have published well to a diverse audience, and that's when this comes into picture. Just like Hollywood tells you the story, like इस फिल्म में ये दिखाया गया है कि इसने शाहरुख खान ने ऐसा किया था या अक्षय कुमार ने वैसा किया था. The same way, if you're a scientist, you're a researcher, you're from engineering, management, science, whatever, whichever area, you have to be able to tell a story. And how do you tell the story? You have to communicate it well. So the art of storytelling is important. And of course, if you need any help, if you have some really good research and you want to make professional videos, I have a professional service called videonim.com. I'm the founder of it, and you can just shoot an email to me, and for a fee, because we hire people like graphic designers, and we also have some like people, actors and other people. So they can do that for you. Sometimes we use animations. So I think I'll end this my talk today. It was a pleasure interacting with all of you, and now I'm open to questions. So please let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for being with me today. Thank you.
So we have one question. May I know what is the difference between academic writing and scientific writing?
Academic writing and scientific writing, basically they are kind of two sides of the same coin. Now academic writing basically is done by people who are in the area. You're working for a university, you are an academician, whereas scientific writing can also be done by people who are not in academics. Like for example, I am working in industry, I am working for the Indian military, I'm working in a government agency. I'm not an academician. So I'm not doing academic writing, I'm doing scientific writing, because it is not strictly or purely academic in nature. It may have some implications in certain areas. So, for example, if I am working with some pharmaceutical company, and it is not a purely academic work, it is a work that has called commercial implications, and that is kind of a minor difference. But having said that, these are all phrases that we like to use. At the end of the day, it all boils down to scholarly communication. And regardless of whether you're in academia or industry or anywhere else, if you're good in your scholarly communication or technical communication, you should be able to do good academic writing or scientific writing or whatever writing you want to do.
So we have another question. Narcotic Control Bureau is a specialized agency to deal with drug crimes data in India. While
Okay.
National Crime Record Bureau also provide data related to various crimes in India, including drug crimes. Generally, it has been found that there are variation in data of these two agencies. In these circumstances, which data should be cited?
Okay. What are the two agencies?
National Narcotic Control Bureau, and next one is National Crime Record Bureau.
Okay. National Crime Record Bureau.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, see, the thing is, this is a very field-specific question. So I'm not specifically from the field of forensics or anything related to narcotic crimes. So what you have to do is you have to consult the experts from your specific area. But having said that, what I can clearly see, that one of the agencies that you have quoted or mentioned, it basically describes crime from various areas. Like it's like a repository where you'll find crime from across areas, whereas the other agency only maintains data on specific crimes from the area of narcotics. So I would rather say go for that. Whatever agency publishes records on the narcotic crimes first, and then if you want, probably you can go to the more general website, unless somebody from your field tells you not to do so, which I don't think is likely. So yeah, the more specific, the better.
Uh, Another question, sir, is scholarly writing and copywriting different?
Okay, now scholarly communication is very specific to academic work or publications or even industry work. You use scholarly communication or scholarly writing, whatever you want to say, for submitting grants or manuscripts. And copywriting is a slightly different thing. It's like a subset of scientific writing, because in scientific writing you also do many other things, like you need to know the materials and methods from scratch. You are the whole and sole person who is completely in charge of the entire document, whereas copywriting is something that you can do for probably someone else, or it's a tiny subset of scientific writing. But nevertheless, both of the things still need good communication skills. And as far as I can see, a person who is good in communicating his or her thoughts, regardless of what field you are in or whatever task you're doing, it could be academic writing, copywriting, writing for some patent application, whatever it could be. Basically, the idea is simple. You can use various kinds of phrases, but at the end of the day, the idea is really simple. It's technical communication. You are trying to communicate whatever technical work you did using some language which is uh, basically the norm in your industry. And yeah, that if you communicate using the right phrases, you are in. So that's what is required at the end of the day, regardless of what you call it.
So we have another question. Since most Indian write bad English, are we losing out on publication in good journals or getting research grant from the foreign entities?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Now, I would say that the good part about it is now this used to be the case several years ago. Now, people like Elsevier nowadays they have contracts with professional editing services. I used to work for one in Mumbai. There's a multinational company in Mumbai. It goes by the name Inago. I also used to work for another very famous editing agency. It goes by the name Cactus Communications or Editage or Cactus Communications. And what they used to do is, they used to edit scientific manuscripts on behalf of publishers. So at Inago, what used to happen is Elsevier used to send accepted manuscripts to us. I mean, not us, to another team, and then that team used to edit the accepted manuscripts because it used to have some language issues. So if you generally submit to a decent journal, the journal generally have they generally outsource it to a editing company. But having said that, I would still say that many manuscripts, yes, they do get rejected because the referees, even before they start reading what the technical content is, they come across like dozens and dozens of language related issues. So they get so kind of overwhelmed with that thing that they just click the button that says reject because of language issues, and then you have to correct it. That's why I tell people that before you submit, make sure you run it through Grammarly Premium or hire a professional scientific editor who can do that for you, so that it will be much easier and faster for you.
Sir, next question we have. Can we incorporate a preliminary data in research grant proposal?
I'm sorry, can you say
Can
that
we
again?
incorporate a preliminary data in research grant proposal?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And in fact, it is always a good idea to include preliminary data in your grant proposal. Why? I'll tell you why. One of my friends, when I was working at NIH, he had published $100,000 grant. He got 100,000 US dollars for his grant. I still have the grant with me. So what he did in that grant is he basically submitted some preliminary data, and I asked him like, how did you submit this? Like he said, nowadays that's the norm. Any funding agency is not going to give you a grant, is not going to approve your grant unless and until you have some preliminary data, because the competition is so much nowadays that see, there is one grant, 100 people will apply. Why would the funding agency give the grant to you when someone else already has the preliminary data? You don't have the preliminary data. So whoever has the preliminary data has already done some work, they are showing more promise, then the grant will be given to that person. So that's why, yes, the answer to the question is yes, you should have some preliminary data in your grant proposal. That's correct.
Any other questions? I think we are done, sir.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks, Nikhil madam. Thanks to the university, and I thank everybody for your time.
Sir,
And I hope have a positive day, everybody. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
thank you, sir. Thank you for sparing your time.
Thank you, and let's wish all the best to the Indian Armed Forces on the border. They are working
Sure,
really
sir.
hard.
Thank you.
Okay, good day, everybody.
Good day, sir.